Welcome to the Kelly Sullivan Walden Show, where we explore nighttime dreams, daytime desires, and the best ways to transform the tragic into magic. Because let's face it, we all dream, we all have our blessings, and we all have our challenges, myself included. And I don't want any of us to take any of those things lying down, if you know what I mean. I just wrote a book entitled A Crisis is a Terrible Thing to Waste. I'm excited to explore the topic with you, whether it relates to your waking or sleeping dreams, because we're dreaming all the time, people. So let's make it the best dream possible. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome. Welcome, everyone, to the show today. I am so thrilled to have two amazing guests joining me. This is going to be a show that will be life-changing, and I would even say life after life-changing. So are you growing older and beginning to wonder about the meaning of life? Are you someone whose enjoyment of life has been severely restricted due to persistent, intrusive fears of death? Or are you just naturally curious about anything and everything about the life beyond, like me? So if any of those descriptions fit you, then this show is for you. So after decades of persistent and rigorous skeptical inquiry, these two, who I will introduce to you in a second, are absolutely as certain as, from a scientific perspective, as well as from just being a curious human can be, that there is life beyond life. So I have two guests, Dr. Raymond Moody, PhD, MD. He is the leading authority on the near-death experience, a phase he coined and experienced as he defined in the late 70s. His seminal work, Life After Life, completely changed the way we view death and dying, and it has sold more than 13 million copies worldwide. The New York Times calls Dr. Moody the father of the near-death experience. And there's so many things I could say about him. We could just say that Oprah's had him on his show many, many times, and he has absolutely pioneered this world. And my dear friend Danyon Brinkley talks highly of him, and he's a big part of Danyon's story. Danyon, who's been on the show before. Paul Perry is Dr. Raymond Moody's co-author, and he is also the co-author of 5 New York Times bestsellers, including Light Beyond with Raymond Moody, Saved by the Light with Danyon Brinkley, and Evidence of the Afterlife with Jeffrey Long, MD. Perry has co-written a dozen books on near-death experiences, 4 of them with Dr. Moody, and his books have been published in more than 30 languages around the world. He's known for a documentary, Jesus, The Lost Years, and a documentary based on his book, Jesus in Egypt. And I'd love to talk about all of those things. There's so many more things I could say about him, but I want to talk about their book that they've written that's just come out, Proof of Life After Life: 7 Reasons to Believe in the Afterlife. This groundbreaking book explores some things that I have never even heard about. This is SDE. This is where people have the same, or they have where they overlap in their death experiences. Anyway, I'm going to let them talk about it. Dr. Raymond Moody and Paul Perry, thank you so much for joining me today. So
Well, thank you for having
Thank
us.
you. Thank you, Kelly.
so
And
this
thanks
this book is
also
a
to the folks listening in.
yes, 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 and all the ones that are physical, and all of the ones who are non-physical.
Well,
Okay, so there's so much to tackle here. Let's talk a little bit about the precognitive aspect of this book, of proof of life after life. So who wants to start first?
can I start off, Raymond?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
we have to back up a little bit because for, well, together for 35 years, we've researched near-death experiences. Raymond was doing it 15 years before then. So he's really the old pro. But for 35 years, we've been researching near-death experiences. We've written 6 books together. This is our 6th one.
My God.
And in each of the books, we have had this thing that we started calling shared death experiences.
Right.
And a shared death experience is when a person who is well shares the death experience of a person who is dying. So oftentimes this person is a loved one, but usually this person is not. I mean, we have in the book, we have all kinds of cases reported in which medical doctors, nurses, and other hospital personnel see the spirit of a patient leaving her body at the point of death. There's precognitive experiences well, if you had a precognitive experience, you might see someone standing at the end of your bed. You might wake up and see someone standing there that you know, and they tell you that they're going to die, and they were not expected to die, but then you find out in the morning that they in fact had died. There's
Mm-hmm.
several like that. There's a area called terminal lucidity, which we should talk about a
Yes.
little bit as well.
Oh, yes.
And then there's Raymond's method of reaching the dead relatives and others through a technique called the psychomantium. So
Well, yeah, psychomantium. That is
yeah,
mind blowing. Everybody, you're going to want to hear about this. So
yeah.
don't go anywhere. Stay right where you are.
So to better explain shared death experiences is I have a really excellent case study that we have in the book. It's a Hollywood producer, female, whose name I can't mention. And she was on the East Coast visiting her boyfriend in Cape Cod. And early in the morning, she began to feel kind of uneasy. She couldn't sleep, but she felt uneasy in a different way. And her feelings kind of intensified. And she began to think about members of her family. She woke up her boyfriend and told him what was going on with her. And they laid there for a while and talked about it. She began to toss and turn, as did her boyfriend, because they were trying to go back to sleep. And then suddenly they both woke up and they saw her father hovering over them in bed like a ghost, which is of course not what a couple wants. But uh, and they both kind of froze and looked at her father for several moments, and she immediately knew that something had happened to her father back on the West Coast. She said
Mm.
it wasn't creepy at all to either one of them. And as she said, I looked at him for signs of distress or some other reason that he was there, but I just couldn't figure it out. Then it dawned on me that he was certainly dead and wanted to tell me himself. We had already always had a strong bond, and he wanted to tell me in person.
Oh,
Both her and her boyfriend saw the vision. That's a shared death vision. That makes it a shared death vision right there. But
right.
this is like a three-way shared death vision because her father shared with her
Mm-hmm.
that he was dying, and the boyfriend also was there and saw the same thing that his girlfriend saw, that the Hollywood producer saw.
What I think is especially compelling about your book is the first word in the title, proof,
Right.
because that it's your this isn't just experiences. I mean, you do mention some of the experiences that people have had themselves that are not quantifiable, but mostly you lean heavy so that even the skeptics have to wonder,
Right.
have to be open. I mean, this is so, especially having shared experiences, this makes it a bit more empirical,
It
right?
does. Oh,
Dr.
it
Moody,
definitely
what
does.
about you?
It does. I Why I'm comfortable with the word proof is that I
Yeah.
was a professor of logic and I taught my students all about the concept of proof. And I know what a proof is by the logical and mathematical terms. But then, coming from that environment, once I got known for the near-death experiences, I constantly encountered people who tell me, Raymond, is there any kind of proof of this? Well,
Right.
what in the world are they talking about was my first, because I know the complications from the philosophical and logical point of view. But what I quickly realized that, was when people had asked me this and I would start talking about Ludwig Wittgenstein and Bertrand Russell, their eyes would just turn up, right? So what I finally figured out what the average person, not a mathematician or a philosophy professor, wants to know from me when they ask Raymond, is there any sort of proof? And that's in the context of a grief, for example, longing for a lost loved one, or an anxiety about death, or a terminal diagnosis, or just in the life process of becoming a middle-aged person that
Right.
this bubbles up with people.
Mm-hmm.
And so those were the people asking me. And so what it boiled down to, I figured they wanted is that and this is what they wanted by proof is it a rational thing to
Mm-hmm.
anticipate and expect that when you die you will transfer over into another level of reality? And I say it is,
Mm-hmm.
based on being a lifelong skeptic in the real sense. The people who call them skeptics, they don't know what the word means. Those are
Mm-hmm.
entertainers mostly. But
Mm-hmm.
what a skeptic is, in the philosophical sense, is that your technique is to avoid drawing a conclusion. It's a spiritual as well as philosophical practice where you think of every reason not to think of something is what you
Mm-hmm.
do.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you, it's like they knew logic very well, but if you think of logic as going in this direction to the conclusion, what the skeptics did is they say, no, I'm going to apply the logic very vigorously, but I'm not going to draw the conclusion. And what they found is that expands your mind, number one, which is neat. But number two, that since everybody else is rushing in that same direction to the conclusion, but you're looking to the sides, you see side pathways that nobody else did. And
Mm.
so that's been my process. And in that process, trying to think of every possible reason why not, I have reached the point of I give up. I can't think my way out of it. Now, what the many people are, I think the just observation of human nature will reveal to you that many people are very scared of this subject. And the reason is that whatever stance they may take on, they argue about it by the same limited framework that we know all the way back to the Greeks.
Mm.
And that is that some people look at this like Plato did and say, oh, yeah, this is an indicator of an afterlife. But there's another group of people led in, at Plato's time, it was by Democritus, his rough contemporary, who had just figured out by reason alone that things are made of tiny little bits called atoms. So when he wrote about the same experience we're talking about now, Democritus said, well, even when the body appears dead, there's still biological activity going on. And that, there's no such thing as a moment of death. Well, now we know that is the oxygen deprivation to the brain
Mm-hmm.
thing, right?
Mm.
Well, people who are scared of this topic feel comfortable with keeping it within that framework. But see, the reason why the shared death experiences are so sensational is they break down that framework.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a shared death experience, bystanders who are not themselves ill or injured, but who
Mm-hmm.
are involved in a nearby or even psychologically linked to someone who is dying, that even though the bystanders are not ill or injured, they have identically the same experience. That when it occurs to someone who we bring back from a cardiac arrest, we call a near death experience. The bystanders will say, as grandma died, I myself, I got out of my body and I went part way toward this light, and then I came
Right.
back. Or the bystanders will say that as grandma died, we saw her mother and father who had died come into the room, and or the people will say the room changed shape as you get into some other kind of geometry, or the room filled with light. And most remarkably to me, I have a lot of cases where the bystander actually empathically co-lived the dying life review of the person who passed away that time. And the first cases of these I knew of were people who were very intimate with the dying person, right? And so I assumed that that had to be the case, that it had to be somebody. For example, a woman who was raised with her husband from childhood friends, then got married. This relationship from forever, and then she was telling me that as her husband was dying, she was co-participating in his life review. She saw all of these things, and I thought, well, surely there's got to be somebody very close. But then some years ago, my wife and I got a communication from a physician who was called to the ER to resuscitate a person he had never laid eyes on. And yet, as this man was passing away, the doctor had a panoramic memory review. And so, what I'm getting at here to see is these old ways of thinking about these things that's broken. It's if the bystanders and the people who get resuscitated are having the same thing, that there's something more going on than oxygen deprivation to the brain. And my thing, the way I've come to this is I just give up. I, you know, I, and the reason that came about was it just, and logically, this is not a good reason, I realize, but it's the psychological compelling point to me was I don't know how many good physician friends, some of whom I'm sure, Eben Alexander
Yes, Eben
or the
Alexander.
doctor,
Right.
Dr. Anthony Chicoria, the orthopedic surgeon, or Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, who's an emergency room physician, and all of these people, to my knowledge, have had extraordinary experiences of this, like of the shared death experience, for example.
Right.
Dr. Jeffrey O'Driscoll in the room where a patient, Jeffrey Olson, was being resuscitated or being treated after having his leg crushed off in a car accident in which his wife was killed and one of the children, I believe, but another child lived. But as Dr. Jeffrey O'Driscoll went into the room where Jeffrey Olson was being, saved, that Jeff O'Driscoll had a conversation with Jeff Olson's dead wife. I could give you a lot of other cases. Now, in every case, my physician friends tell me that not only was this real, but this was more real than real. This more a higher level of reality than what we're in now. Now, see what I'm thinking is, I am I am addicted totally to walking every morning. I mean, it used to be running, but I gotta move. Okay, it's not a virtue; it's an addiction. Right
That's a good addiction.
now, if I were to find, heaven forbid, I don't even say these words, but if something were to happen to my foot, you know, would I go to consult Dr. Anthony Chicoria, who tells me that his experience of being hit in the neck by lightning, having a cardiac arrest, seeing a whole different world, and subsequently becoming a concert pianist because of what
Right.
I mean, would I go to Anthony Chicoria to fix my foot? Absolutely, I would. Now, see, that's where I just give up. I can't think it's never the thing about the oxygen deprivation to the brain. That was never in my calculations because one of my own medical school professors told me about her experience that she had of leaving her body and seeing this light and all. She was resuscitating her mother. And so, yeah, I've never fallen for that. But the fact that it's not oxygen deprivation to the brain doesn't mean that it is, therefore, life after death. I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But see, I mean, I give up. I can't think of any way out of it.
Well,
Oh,
I think that there's what's going to happen is as people read this and as this becomes a massively popular book, which I absolutely know that it will, the proof will be on the other side, as you say in the book. It'll be about how can you prove that there isn't life
good.
after death, where there's such
Yeah.
compelling evidence, and what you've done with thousands and thousands of cases,
Yeah.
especially the SDE, the shared death experience.
Yeah.
Mm.
Can I throw in one that I think I had just to see what you all think of? So I'll
Absolutely.
be
Yeah.
short about this. So there was one of my dear friends, her niece's name was Maddie, and she had a disease that everyone knew that she was going to die very young, and she had outlived how long they thought she was going to live. She was about 12 when she actually passed, and she had become such a beloved girl in the community in Michigan. I mean, thousands of people knew about her and were rooting for her. So it was a heartbreak when she passed. And the night before she passed, her father was in the room with her, and Maddie was out. She was in a coma. And out of nowhere, Maddie springs up in bed and says, "Oh, look at all the kids. I didn't know they were going to have a party for me." And there was absolute silence except for the beeping of all the medical things, but there was nobody in the room except the dad that and he didn't see it. He didn't see the party, but he saw Maddie see it. And she was so excited. And then she lays down and she passes.
That's right. Yeah.
So the
Terminal
next day,
lucidity. Yeah.
my friend Shar, who was the aunt of Maddie, calls me in tears saying Maddie died, and she's telling me the whole story, and she gets to the part where she tells me about the party and the kids. And throughout this conversation with Maddie, my sister Janine, who is completely unrelated to any of this, kept trying to call me, and I saw her trying to break through the phone, but I kept ignoring the call because I wanted to have this very important conversation about Maddie. But finally, Janine just kept persisting. So I just said, "I'm so sorry. Hold on for 1 second. Let me open up the line." And so I said, "Janine, I'm going to call you back." And she's like, and she's yelling at me, "Kelly, Kelly, Kelly." And I'm like, "I just have to go." And I hung up. I talked to Janine later, and she said that every time she called me, especially when she got through, it sounded like I was at a kid's party. There
Huh.
was there was
Wow.
all kinds of sounds like little kids saying, and I was in a room by myself in my office, no one around.
Yeah.
But there was, and Janine was this objective person who had no idea of any of this, hearing a little kid's birthday party at the time that Shar had been telling me about this. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Okay.
Absolutely. And I've been there. This is, what's so interesting about this is that the implications of all of these things that we're learning is number one, coming into this world partly because of a technological development. Think about it. It's
Right.
like, in effect, these near-death experiences have always been around. Plato knew about them, okay? But they were extraordinarily rare.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened was that in the 60s and 70s, uh, what was once an extraordinarily rare thing came came to be something that would happen on a daily basis in hospitals. And the number of people began to grow and the technique get better. So there was kind of like a point where it just suddenly everybody looked around under the impetus of my book. But
Hmm.
that what I life after life, but what I was doing was I was just pointing out, describing what I had observed, which I knew by that point that anybody who wanted to, like any doctor who wanted to check up on me, would quickly come to the same conclusion, which is what happened.
Yeah. And
But
that's
that,
one of the, well, I was going
but
to say that's one
because
of the
of that,
great things about Raymond's work,
Yeah.
that he named and defined the near-death experience,
Right.
just like
and
he's
so
named
what
and
is
defined
happening
the
now,
shared
see,
death experience. And it opened the door for people to talk about it.
Right.
Because up
and
until
then
that point, people didn't know what it was and they were afraid to talk.
and
And there was also
concurrently
it
with
was
the
like you might be
aging of the
considered crazy.
population.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
with the aging of the population, and you're a little young to realize this,
Oh,
but
you're
you
too
will
kind.
see this more pronounced as you grow older, Kelly. The older you get, the greater percentage of people you've known for a long, long time, your age, have had some experience during their life of crossing over to some other zone. So,
Yeah.
what was in the 1920s extraordinary and freakish and unknown is in the 2020s, it just a
Hmm.
part and parcel of culture.
Right.
It's like it's something that it touches everybody, knows somebody who is absolutely convinced that they have been to another world, and but who are not only that kind of functional in society. They're your um, the woman at the store who gives you your groceries, or the guy who sells you insurance. I mean, it's
Yeah.
everybody. It's not some special caste of priests or initiates who went through some ceremony. It's just ordinary people who, because of modern technology, have come back from the other world. So the
Right.
other world is seeping into this.
Sure.
It's not even the other world. It's
Well,
just
that's right. A
Yeah.
it's
higher,
just
a higher something of this one.
It's
I
right here
think
Yeah.
next
that
to us. It's, try this sometime. I'm sure you've done this, but the people listening to this might not have done it. Sometime at a group of 5 or 6 people, if you're having lunch together, just bring this subject up and talk to them about what a shared death experience is, and then ask them, have you or anyone in your family ever experienced this? I guarantee you'll hear a number of incredible stories. It changes the whole conversation at the table.
and well, shared death experiences I think are special because they offer more proof.
Right.
And yet even a near death experience, I mean, I have my own on my 40th birthday, 8/8/2008. I I went away and then and came back 15 minutes later, and I've never I'd like to say I'm an enlightened version of myself and I'm not, but I did carry some of that with me. And I found this William Blake quote
Hmm.
right afterwards, and I felt like this sums it up. He said, those who he who binds himself to joy does the winged life destroy, but he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. That was
Wow.
kind of my bumper sticker for what I got
Only
from it.
William
That's
Blake. Yeah.
old William Blake, old Willie. And then I
Wow.
met Dannion Brinkley about, I don't know, maybe a week later. And that's, so it kind of opened up a whole world for me. I focus on dreams. Mostly this show is about dreams. And I know you do talk about how this proof of the afterlife shows up in dreams, but I feel like this conversation, they bleed together. So can we
Yeah.
just touch on that, either of you?
What comes up
Dreams.
to my mind is it happened to me. I mean,
Oh, talk about that, please.
We both had
as
shared death experiences.
Yeah.
And that's
yeah,
really what kicked this book off in a lot of ways.
Awesome.
yeah. In terms of my when I back in 1970, my first child died, but at the age of 36 hours. But the thing that happened is that one day before my wife had the miscarriage, we
Oh.
we both woke up at the same time from the same dream in which we were losing the baby. And we went through the whole sequence of events, including me driving her to the hospital and seeing the doctor. She went to a team of three OBGYN guys, but I'd only known one of them. But in the dream, I saw the guy who was on call that night. I'd never seen him. But, like 24 hours later, it happened exactly as in the dream. And, but, I'm saying this
But
not
that,
to be autobiographical, but to say that, how many people listening to this have had
Sure.
these same things. And anybody who thinks about it, even for a few minutes, can figure out that time is not real.
right. Ooh,
You know, Aristotle said, what is time? He said, time is the past, the present, and the future. Well, the past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. And try to hold on to the present. And my
mm,
wife is very brilliant, a lot smarter than me, but not intellectual. She went to art school, but she's just incredibly brilliant. But she was about, and not philosophical, but just the fashion and stuff. And so, several years ago, I saw her just looking in the kitchen, in our living room. She was standing there, and she said, time is not real. I had figured it out, as a kid reading philosophy books, but, here is a woman who's totally geared to the reality as we know it,
oh, right.
who, is kind of waking this up that, there's something wrong with the notion of time.
Oh,
And that people with near death experiences say, well, as soon as you go over there, there's no such thing anymore. People see everything they've ever done, not just from their perspective, but mirrored in the consciousness of others, and yet no time passes.
Yeah.
So you see, the world that we are living in is illusory. But it takes, you can figure it out as a young person, I think, just by your mind. But I think the older you get, the more it becomes obvious that it's just a fact that life is story.
ooh,
What is your personal identity but your story?
right. I want to just say something about the mysterious aspect of this because what I think is hard for the a person who's very rational, and nobody would ever accuse me of such a thing, but I have a rational bone in my body, and I know that I like to see things and touch things and know that I can press a button and get an effect. And with these things, we can't just press a button and have a near death experience or have an afterlife proof or they happen in mysterious ways. And I've two of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books that I worked with Amy Newmark on compiling. One of them, we had so many stories, just like the one you just shared, Raymond, about what happened with you and your wife, except in those books, the person was then able to save the person's life. And those were the only stories we wrote about in this book because she said these have to have a happy ending because that's the
Mm-hmm.
Chicken Soup for the Soul brand. But I
Yeah.
thought so many people, so many more people have the dream or have the vision, and they're not able to change the outcome, but
Yeah.
there's still a miracle in the fact that you
Exactly.
were
Yeah.
able to have that experience before. You were able to defy time. And I'm curious because you don't elaborate on this in the book, but I'm covered in chills as I am just even in this particular question with you. Did that must have been an incredibly painful moment in your life with you and your wife with losing that baby, or
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote losing that baby, but did
Yeah.
having that precognitive dream and that precognitive shared dream give
Uh,
you a sense of something else is happening here?
well, it did. I'm very hard headed. By the way, I wrote a book for the chicken soup folks, but they turned it down. It's like chicken soup for the vegetarian soul, but they didn't want to publish it. So I'm just making that
They
up.
might change their
I'm
mind
just
nowadays.
I'm just making
It
that
They're
up.
much
could
more
Just
work.
making
liberal
that
minded
up.
now.
but 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 Well, you know something, I am such a rationalist in the sense that, Kelly, that really reasoning at things out is just part of me. I
Mhm.
realized when I was 7 years old, looking at a telescope through a telescope, that I was never going to know much of anything. That was a datum to me from the time I was a kid. And so I'm comfortable with the fact that I am, you know, bound to be abysmally ignorant by the cosmic standard. And at the same time that I am true, I mean, curiosity is what drives me. I want to know what is.
Mhm.
And it's just has been all my life, it's been astonishing to me that so many people want to know that such and such. And we, it's like people, I'm not going to be wanting to know that there's an afterlife. What
Right.
is the gain of that? I mean, if you the the what the object of learning things is fun, and you can't have fun with it if you're fooling yourself because you always know that you are. I look at these people as, oh, I want to believe that there's an afterlife is the undertone, but oh yeah, well, you know, this medium told me, and you know, it's so flimsy, and what that
Mhm.
is a perpetual state of unsteadiness because people know they're in it. So I want to work it out to the think every possible reason not to think it is the way you
Mm.
do it. And to be
Mhm.
that, you got to know the rules of reason and all like that. And that makes it fun. And so, in answer to your question, I, I you know, I knew it happened, but I also knew that I had no way of making any inference about it.
Mhm.
And, you know, I realized a long time ago in the taking up the philosophy thing I did, as a philosophy professor, is that it's things are very complex and that a question like life after death is a solemn question. And
Yeah.
it's, I don't want to use the word sacred, but it's getting toward there.
Yeah.
And to me, to act like some fool, like you gotta, you know, that you've got to come up with some answer, you know, just to please people or whatever, that is stupid. What I say is that you got to subject this to the most rigorous analysis. And I think that number one, I give up. I can't think my way out of it. But also for those people who might be listening to this who studied a little logic or loved critical thinking,
Mhm.
would say, what's he talking about? Well, as an aside to you folks, I can say that the classical problems about the afterlife were elucidated, for example, by David Hume, the great skeptic and agent. It's a long story, but they've shown why this doesn't stack up to logic. But I say to those people that, yeah, that problem is solved. I don't worry about that because there's ways now of thinking about not just life after life, but a lot of subjects that used to be unintelligible in a whole new way. But that's just an aside to people who are interested in that. Most people who approach me are not interested in the technicalities of logic. What they want to know is some sort of personal assurance.
Yeah.
And you know, it partly boils down to looking at me as an authority too, which is
Mhm.
uncomfortable to me. So, and therefore, I always point this out that I'm not trying to persuade anybody else. I'm just talking about my own personal process and where I got to it and how that happened. But that the nice thing about this afterlife question is that everybody has to face it in their own way. But insofar as just empirically, as people might want to consult me, because one among a number of people they might want to ask, and
Right.
so a lot of people have come to me in that
Mhm.
capacity. And so where I'm saying is, yeah, I give up. It's a rational thing. It's to expect and anticipate that when you die, you're going to come over into some other state of existence, which friends of
Right.
yours and relatives of yours that you may know about have seen too. And
Right.
so, you know,
During a time like this, I mean, and we could say this probably at any time on planet Earth, but right now we've got two wars that are happening, that are raging, and there's atrocities, and then there's what's happening in people's personal lives, and there's a lot of anxiety at in epic proportion. So many people are unhappy and depressed, even people that are living very lavish lives. There's just a lot of upheaval in the world. And one thing that I get from reading your book, Proof of Life After Life, is there's a different there's a different vibration that I go into in reading a book like yours, that feels like it is the antidote itself. And it does relate to these what's happening in the world. I mean, people are dying, people are being, there's murders, there's just awful things, but to know that there's something else, not just this blank, wide open, empty space of nothingness. If to Then there's some, I feel like there is hope in the for the human spirit. There's something else to hold on to. My atheist friends don't have this, and I don't know that they would pick this book up, but maybe they would, because it's such so logically oriented.
But this is a book for atheists as well as for
Yeah, yeah,
people who are religious,
anybody
because we
who's
don't
just
bring
yeah,
dogma.
curious.
We don't bring dogma into the book. Uh,
right.
we don't
It's true.
go religious on anybody. What we're doing is just showing this is
Hmm.
how it is. This is fact.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you can make up your own mind based on that. Uh,
Yes.
so I think it's a perfect book for an atheist.
Yeah, and
Did
it's just a vast amount of rather extraordinary things that are not accepted as common sense simply because in the since the 1930s, when people started dying in hospitals instead of at home like they
mm,
formerly did, then
hmm
a vast number of extraordinary things that people used to know about as common
right.
sense are coming into
Mhm.
the public consciousness through the medical profession. Because doctors, not people at the home, are now saying, oh, yeah, as this man died, he'd been demented for, I've been treating him for 3 years, but suddenly, I went in there and he's full of light and he's talking to everybody and fully coherently. And
Right.
these things are just so a matter of common observation if you are a person who has dealt in the past, as I have a lot with the terminally ill, and or ask anybody at a hospice it's things that are hard to put together in common sense reality.
The
Yeah,
juxtaposition. I mean, most people think
yeah,
of a doctor in a white coat. We don't think of that person as being woo woo or airy fairy
yeah.
at all. I mean, you are somebody who looks at things under a microscope. You quantify things. So the fact that you have so many stories of
I will say
doctors.
that the doctors resisted within my lifetime. Although I
Yeah.
was in medical school. Even 8 of my professors in the first 2 weeks got in touch with me because they'd known about my work ahead of time and said, "Dr. Moody, thank you for investigating," because they knew from their personal experience or from the
Hmm.
seeing it with their patients. So I was never persecuted by the medical community, but it was still a fact that doctors were at that time among they weren't any more likely to witness these things than many people who are not medical.
Hmm.
because they weren't listening to that aspect of it. The people who initially became aware of this in the medical community were the nurses. Who,
Right.
even medical
Yeah.
school, all of the nurses knew about this, and
Hmm.
because yeah, but the doctors were hurrying through, checking and not ask, but they were asking the patient about bowel movements or how you're breathing or the rash on your head, not about, did you get out of your body? But
Right.
and so that was happening. But now, see, that situation has evolved because
Mhm.
there's so many of them, and so doctors are. There's a whole wonderful book called the Science of Near-Death Experiences by the University of Missouri Press,
That's
all
great.
written by physicians who've confronted this in one way or another.
And Eben Alexander,
Abbott,
eh,
Abbott, and
he
absolutely,
wrote the foreword to your book, and his
yeah.
story is so
It's
elaborate.
just
And
amazing. And,
Really.
and
yeah,
Evan, in addition to one of the nicest and most youthful people ever I've met, is as we both know, beyond a genius. Right? I mean, the word genius is hardly appropriate
right,
to Evan's intelligence, but
right.
that he is another example of what I meant. When I go to Evan for a medical problem? Sure. So,
Yeah, that's the
and
litmus
so I
test.
give up. I can't reconcile that I can't figure out how to get out of the apparent insight as I gather that, yeah, to my astonishment.
You've worked your way
Still
into a
very
corner of
counterintuitive.
proof.
Yeah.
There is
That's
an afterlife. There is, yeah. And
so
wow.
in we only have a few minutes here, and I want to talk a little bit about how most of what when you said that one of the things that you do, by both of you, by virtue of the work that you do, is there's a lot of grief counseling involved.
Mhm,
And most people say, I wish I had 5 more minutes
mhm.
with that person. And you offer a way to be able to have that. People don't have to have FOMO, fear of missing out, from the people that have these
Oh,
experiences.
yeah.
They can sort of enact their own
That's
without
right.
hallucinogenic. So talk about the
And as
psychomantra.
incredible as it may seem, although it did not seem so to your great great grandmother,
Right,
that
right.
there is a fairly, I mean, a very reliable means, which is part of the cultural heritage of humankind, very well recorded by the Greeks. I mean, just all through that, a very simple method of having an experience which seems to you in waking reality of a conversation and a meeting with a deceased relative is the process of evoking the deceased through mirrors. And this was just common knowledge up until it was well known in the 19th century that when people still got together in the living room at night, right, and talked and had games and stuff. And it was known that you could put a mirror up and you could go through certain procedures and like getting your mind right, and you could gaze into the mirror by candlelight and you would see apparitions of grandma, which it turns out you can talk to and stuff too. Now you see, this sounds spooky to us because people start listening to the radio
Mhm.
instead of gazing into mirrors, then
And
gazing
television
into the
now.
artificial television. So people don't do this, but it's an interactive thing. It was well known. And so what you do if you want to do this is it's number one is you don't think of this as an instant gratification thing. This is a process.
Hmm.
And when I was doing it, I got to realize that people were thinking, oh, it's Dr. Moody who can do it. We got it. No, no. I mean, I figured out how to do it from ancient
Mm.
writings, but this technique is accessible to anyone. You need to have a companion, though. I mean, not because when this happens, it's so astonishing. You need somebody to talk to about it. But
Hmm.
basically, it's a process of choosing somebody who's passed over that you want to see again, And
Yeah.
so the
Okay.
very simple way to do it is to mount a mirror on the wall, a mirror that's big enough, no specific dimensions, something like that, so it covers your visual field. You put it on the mirror on the wall above your line of sight, so that when you sit in its comfortable easy chair about 3 feet in front of it and look slightly, as a recliner is nice, and you look up into the mirror, you don't see a reflection. That's you've got, and you can darken the room by painting the walls of the walk-in closet black, or any lots of ways to do it, but you just need to diminish the light and to have a little light behind you that you can operate with a rheostat or a dimmer switch, so that behind your chair there's a little light bulb. And then in this darkened room, you position the mirror again to emphasize that you're not seeing a reflection. This is not matter of reflection. You try to arrange the mirror where it looks like you're looking out into infinite space. And it's fairly easy to do, but you have to jiggle it. Now,
And Paul, you also have some obsidian or some onyx that was also something that was used in Mexico.
No, it was
Can you
used by
talk?
Queen Elizabeth the First, actually.
Ah,
That was through her mathematician and scryer, I guess you would call him, John
ooh,
Dee, who picked up these onyx mirrors from Mexico, from the Aztecs, and started using them to do mirror gazing. And this is the material he used. This is from the volcano
ooh,
that's next to Mexico City.
mm,
And they made these onyx mirrors, and he would gaze into the mirror, and he would see departed loved ones. He would see future history. He,
ooh.
he counseled her on the Spanish Armada and how to not be defeated by the Spanish Armada. And this all came out of these onyx mirrors.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
and this is, it sounds so extraordinary only because we are 21st century Americans.
Isn't it funny?
To most of the rest of the human experience, this has been folk knowledge, something
Ordinary.
everybody knew about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not extraordinary at all.
That's right.
Well, I can't help but feel that this has been an extraordinary conversation, and your book, Proof of Life After Life, is extraordinary.
Thank
I
you.
know so many people that have had near-death experiences, shared death experiences, or that wish they had them, and more wish they had them. They wish they had their own, but I think what you need is to just buy this book, because in Proof of Life After Life, but you'll feel like you're having your own by the time. I mean, there's an energy. There's some books that I read sometimes that literally shake in my hand, or there's an energy in the book, and this is one of those books. This is it's alive, and I think it is itself a portal. So we don't really have to go to extraordinary measures to be able to access what is beyond our ordinary senses most of the time. And perhaps we're all being called to elevate a bit, because extreme times call for extreme measures. So why not do this? So I don't ever want this to end, but I want to give you both an opportunity to say your last words, at least for this conversation. So, Paul, let's start with you. What's the last thing you want to leave my audience with, please?
Well, what do I want to say? I'll say this, okay? Reasonably speaking, we all have a fear of death. I mean, that's a reasonable thing to fear. So I don't think it's realistic to tell an audience that they shouldn't have fear of death. But
Mm-hmm.
instead, what I tell them is that they should study the literature of death studies that indicates the survival of bodily death. Talk to people who have had near-death experiences or shared death experiences. They're all around you in any setting. And figure out a way to bring up the subject, and you'll be surprised and glad you did. Fear is often just a lack of knowledge. And so, yeah, don't fear education. In the end, it's your friend.
Mm. Ah, beautiful. And Raymond Moody, Dr.
And
Moody.
Yeah, thank you so much, and Kelly, for this. And I've just had such a great time. And I want to say to the people listening in, just thank you so much for joining in. I'm not, don't want to portray myself as an expert or anything, but I've just really liked to share these extraordinary things that I've learned, uh, and just hope that the people listening in had a good time and found something interesting.
I'm going to assert that they are having the time of their life. So, everybody, run out and get Proof of Life After Life, 7 Reasons to Believe in the Afterlife by Dr. Raymond Moody and Paul Perry. And this is perfect if you're watching or listening to this in real time. We're coming up on Dia de los Muertos. So, this is the time of, we could say that the veil is particularly thin, but maybe we just become aware of the thinness of that veil that is always there, perhaps. So thank you so much, Paul Perry and Dr. Raymond Moody. This has been an enchanted and very, very special time for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sweet dreams.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Keep doing the great work. Thank
Oh, we
Thanks
you.
so
will.
much. Really appreciate this. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, yes. P.S. Big shout out to Michelle Ashanti and Michelle Ashtiani, and Richard Cohn and all of the folks at Beyond Words. Thank you so much for bringing us all together. Sweet dreams.
Sing the
Everybody's
song.
got
Wait.
troubles.
Stop, Raymond. Wait. Now
Uh,
say it again. This is Moody's Three
We
Laws
need
of
to hear
Trouble.
yeah,
Moody's
Moody's
three
three
laws
laws
of
of troubles. And then the corollary of it is the law of normality. But the three laws of
Oh,
troubles
I'm sorry. Stop.
are,
Okay. Just a minute. I'm gonna record it too.
Moody's 3 laws of trouble.
troubles.
Okay,
This
so
is
And all I've tried this
troubles.
everywhere.
this is
Everybody
Raymond
says
Moody's Three
it.
Laws of Trouble.
It's the everybody says, and I've done this in Europe. I did it in China. Everywhere you go, in South America. And the three laws of troubles are: number one, everybody's got troubles, right?
Yeah.
Number two, everybody's troubles are the worst troubles in the world.
Mm.
And number three is one, at the moment that you put one set of troubles to bed, another equally or more daunting set pops up out of nowhere to take their place.
Yeah.
And that is the best argument that I know for the existence of God, because
Oh my
somebody's got to be timing that. And I think
That
it's God. I mean, God doesn't send us here on a pleasure mission exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, part of it, but we're here to learn things.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
He keeps us throwing this stuff. It's like you can't, it's relentless. And
it's like a big cosmic game of whack-a-mole.
And
yeah,
You
and
get
so
one
is.
as soon as one set goes, he says, "All right, now try this." Right.
There's no such thing as a pleasure mission anyway. Right? Even if you take the most beautiful cruise on the most
Yeah,
beautiful ship,
that's
you're going to
right.
find a problem.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
right. Oh, so if you accept this, then it stops being quite as difficult because we take the personalness out. We just think, oh,
It's
this is the
it's a
nature of life. I
theater.
signed up for this.
That's
Here we
good.
go.
Yeah,
Life is in
there you
session.
go. It's a theater. And
Right.
Aristotelian listening to this would say Raymond Moody is committing a logical fallacy because he's taking one aspect of the human experience, namely the theater, and he's projecting it out as a model of the whole, and that's a logical fallacy. It's literalizing a metaphor. But I say, oh no, it's not a fallacy because it happened the other way around.
Yeah.
I say that the reason why we have the theater is that people like Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides were thinkers who, just like older people, realized the older you get, oh, this is like a player's script. So they said, oh, then because of this one discovery, the guy stepping out of the chorus and speaking his own lines created a sensation, right? Like more, more, more. So the Greeks, what's it about? Competition. Let's have a contest. First winner, Aeschylus, who's still being performed, right?
Yeah.
Then Sophocles and Euripides, and you know, and that didn't happen, but it happened because that's the way we are set up, is that we story form our life.
Hmm.
And that the older you get, the more you do that, and when you see that the essence of it is story.
So
See?
do you think the constant
So,
replacement of troubles are part of a story form?
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be troubles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would be. I can't imagine a life,
right.
you know. What I think I've used for 10 or 15 years now that people respond very strongly to is, I asked them, suppose that you were diagnosed with horrific infection that necessitated that you be isolated all by yourself on a desert island for 10 years.
Okay.
And they could take you out there in a cargo plane that had all the food and water and medicine you'd need for 10 years. But there's some extra space in which they can send a DVD player and, let's say, 5,000 DVDs or 10,000 DVDs. So what I ask people is, would you choose all comedies? And only 3 people, all who had that vacant look in their eyes, said yes.
Oh no.
Just very no, no. Very few people when they think about it, would you choose all comedies? No. So I say, well, would you choose some tragedies? Sure.
Oh.
Hmm.
And then I say, well, when you were out
Woo.
there on that desert island watching that tragedy, would you be crying? And of course you would, because that's the experience of it. And so, if you, assuming that as I do, that you come, there's another context before this thing we're in now, whereas Plato said, there's this kind of thing, you see a flat screen, and he said on it are not, he said, he didn't say lives, he said all the patterns of lives that you could. So there's a choosing process and sorting process.
Hmm.
And then he says you come in here and you go through what's called an event barrier, where it's like the mind. It's like when you're in the kitchen and you're in the living room and you decide you want to go into the kitchen, right? What happens as soon as you go through you want to get something in the kitchen, right? So as soon as you go through the kitchen door, you forget what you came in there for, right? And Plato says it's like that's how it is when we come over here. And that my point is that even when these
Oh my God,
troubles
I
are
love
going
that.
on,
Ooh,
see, it's
that's
part
good.
of the story. And
Oh,
then
that's
and
so
then at the
good.
end, then at the end, God freezes all the frames, everything, and puts them in this hologram. And you watch it, you watch everything at once in an instant, in no time, in a no time state of existence. And you re-witness it not just through your eyes, but through empathically through the consciousness of others. Is mind-boggling.
Mm,
Wow.
But
my
it's
God.
God is familiar with our story. That's I think it's the
Mm,
Kulikov effect, where cinematographers say if you take uh, a pencil and a Diet Coke can or any two random objects
Mm-hmm.
and you present them in a sequence to people, the mind automatically starts weaving a story. And so consciousness
mm,
itself is narrative, which is why I think the ultimate skeptic, David Hume, said the only kind of afterlife that he could comprehend would be a rational person could entertain would be the reincarnation. And he didn't say why, but I'm assuming it's because he was a historian, so he understood that narrative is just it's a necessary part of the human experience. It used to be
Yeah. Yeah.
mythology, but and then it's narrative is what this is all about.
Oh,
Raymond,
so true.
that's one of the best riffs I've heard from you in ages.
Oh
Wow. Well,
God,
listen, it's
I
one
am
I've
so
said all the
lucky.
time. By the way, I give it in its entirety in my book. Didn't want to mention that, but because we don't want to confuse the people. But I have a self-published book called uh, um, uh, "God is Bigger Than the Bible,"
Yeah.
where I talk about my consciousness, my narrative-based theory of personality.
Oh,
Awesome.
oh, that's good. I've always said God is doesn't fit into the Bible. God, yeah,
Yeah, that's
like
right. God is bigger than the
you got you
Bible.
just
And
kind of
also, all those
Question
Bible
God.
authors, you know what I've discovered about? I've never read the Bible. And I know enough about the Bible to know I don't know much about the Bible. But a lot of people are not aware that they are not knowledgeable about the Bible. And they will make all kind of pretensions. So what I did, I just learned a tiny little bit. Just, just, and so then I would ask people, and invariably, they don't know any more than I do. It's just that they've got to present this bravado about the Bible. It's like they use it.
right.
It's bibliolatry is what that's called. It's like worship of a book.
Mm.
And I've
Oh,
never read the Bible, and I've never been religious, and I talk to God every day. And he has never said a word to me about the Bible or about religion. And I think he would if he had any interest in me thinking about
oh, that is so amazing. I am just so glad that my 1 o'clock session canceled because this is just, I feel like I won the lottery having
it.
this conversation. You too.
Well, thank
I
you
wanted
so.
to just share this little thing just because I think it's interesting and you might like it. This young woman came to me for a session. Actually she was the niece. So there's another niece and young girl situation. So I told you about the one that passed away. I've got two of these in my life. This other young girl with cystic fibrosis, she died at 19 years old. Her name was Claire Wineland. And she became pretty famous because she was doing a lot of YouTube videos from her hospital room. And she just kind of shined a lot of light of what it's like to be terminally ill and be in the hospital and be a kid who she's like I mean, she was just an incredibly funny and deep character. Anyway, she came to me for sessions because I'm a dream person, and she was having a series of dreams. We called them bridge angel dreams. And it all started with her climbing up like a jack in the beanstalk kind of a thing that led her up to what she was an atheist, but she went to this place that she called, what did she call it? She just called it, like, I think she didn't call it heaven. It was just like love, beauty, something like that. But she said once she got there, she didn't need her oxygen tank. So she threw it down and she was able to do cartwheels, and and then she was able to know the answers to everything, including why the boy she liked wasn't calling her back, and then she asked, why do I have this disease? And she got the answer, because she had always assumed it was because she had done something wrong or that she was bad. And what she got was, you have been so good
A
that
learning
you get the
experience. Yeah,
gift
yeah,
of a short life that has impact, and that you get to do all the things that everybody wants to do that
yeah.
takes them decades. You get to do it all so quickly. Anyway,
Yeah.
she was given the
Yeah.
assignment to go to the bedside of somebody who was dying that she didn't know. And because she knew how to get to this place, her job was to be very compelling. Even though they didn't want to leave, they wanted to stay with their family. She had to say, oh my God, you have to see this place. It is amazing. Come with me. And they would come with her, and then they'd hug her and they'd be so happy. She would do this night after night after night, hundreds of these dreams with all these strangers, people that she'd never seen.
Wow.
So, and now she's on the other side. And I said, please be my
Wow.
bridge angel when the time comes. But have you heard anything
Well,
quite like
that
this?
is, you know, that is not surprising to me, and it's extraordinary at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, this system we're in is so fluid, and it's all the one of the big limits on it is the what can be conventional. You know, and I mean, at a certain point, once the movie starts talking about itself and how it's a movie, then the spell breaks, right?
Oh, like the aside, the
Well, it's
the
kind of like, you know, how much of knowledge about the afterlife could this life tolerate without breaking apart?
right. Oh,
See, I mean,
right.
it's because it would come a point, I guess, where the object would be gone. So, I mean, it's a really interesting question, which
Mm.
is shaped by all kinds of factual things, which are absolutely true, which are absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I can't go into, I mean, it's too not time, but Kelly, but, you know, for example, say people
Yeah,
contrast
yeah.
logic with the other side, you know. Well, in fact, what we know as logic came here from the other side. The man who invented it said he got it from a
Mm.
goddess in the other world. And, you know, I mean, it's just very bizarre the way this thing is structured that we're in. And so, I
We've
mean,
got
it
it
seems
upside
to me
down,
that
right?
it's at some point it would have to kind of unravel, I would think, with or or that or that people would have to come if people really did have a rational comprehension of the afterlife. One thing we can know about them is that they would not be like us, that they would have a whole new way of thinking.
What do you
Because
mean
in
by
the
that?
logic that we have, it doesn't make any sense to say there's an afterlife because that's a self-contradiction.
Mm.
But
Oh,
nonetheless, as I gather, there is. See, so what that means is there's some flaw in this. I know in physics now, some people are. It's this is goes way back to Plato, who saw it. You know, he said, "Well, what if we had people constrained in a cave down
right.
below, and they're constrained so they can only look at the back wall of the cave, and then behind them there's a fire and a wall and shadows. And they would take the shadows to be real." Well,
Right.
nowadays you know, the physicists are now saying, "Is this a simulation?" But it's the same thing, and or same thing I'm saying by saying it's an illusion that has a narrative structure, and that what people want when they say they want an afterlife is that they want the story to go on.
Right.
Right.
Right? You know,
Wow.
Oh my
but the
God.
trouble is that it's the transition is to another form of literature. I guess. I mean, it's you don't go into a story state of consciousness on the other side apparently.
Mm.
It has.
Okay.
I ask what,
One.
you know, here it's time and space is the orienting principles, but I
Mm-hmm.
asked Eben, I said, you know, there's no time and space there, what are the orienting principles? And he said love and knowledge.
Say that again. Love and knowledge.
Love and knowledge.
Yeah.
Is people like you know, like George Ritchie, Di Horton, others described to me like a whole institution of higher learning that, and you know, that is just like George Ritchie said, if you try to imagine MIT and Caltech and, you know, University of Virginia and, uh, you know, Harvard and Yale and Princeton, I just try to squeeze them into one that you can't even imagine. It's like it's like a whole realm where people are pursue knowledge.
When I think about the story in your book that you did bring up in this interview about the doctor, I can't remember his name, who got, I think he got really ill and nearly died, and then and realized that he had been sort of a Scrooge character. Her bed had been very materialistic and judgmental, but he
Oh,
came.
that was,
Was that
yeah, that's
or was that Raj?
Raj.
That
Yeah.
was Raj.
Raj
So
Party.
so would you, I'm always curious about, like, okay, what's the point? Like, if the point of packing this world in with as much science and data and content as possible about the other side, so that it breaks open, so that it does break.
Hmm.
And most people that have either had their own direct experience, or they know somebody that's had an experience, or they read about it, it does alter them. It does make them more like what happened to Raj. Like, it's an evolutionary quantum leap
Right.
in some way. So if we were going to leap all the way to the apex of maybe what we can even imagine, what would be, what do you imagine life on Earth as a human that is still oriented a bit by time and space, but we have
That's
absolute
fascinating question.
awareness?
Yeah. It has
What would
happened.
we be
It's
like?
happened before. It's happened before. It's like,
Lemuria and
well, like what it involves is when that happens, it usually has in the past involved a mental process that I call a logico-spiritual exercise. In other words, in a situation where people's rational principles are somehow inconsistent or inconsonant with the things that are happening around them. The experience that seems there, but it doesn't fit into the rules. Then there is, at numerous times in history, there have been people who break through it, who use logic to bring the mind to a higher, what is appears at that time to be a spiritual level.
mm-hmm.
And the first and primary example of it that I know of would be the Pythagorean. Uh, but see, it's like you think about you in the 11th grade or whatever, you learned about the Pythagorean theorem and have the comp, and you can figure it out. But
Mm-hmm.
and so it's just something you learn in the 11th grade. But imagine the mindset of people who first discovered that. Just a minute here. If you can take these two or three things that are just just completely obviously true, and then you can go from them to something else by a logical inference,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Mm-hmm.
you can go then the next step and the next step, and then it becomes clear that the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. That is an astonishing in that context, isn't it? I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
normal to you, but think back to the origins of it, that people
Mm-hmm.
realized that you could go, and this was before there was, or about the time there was writing. It helped, but it was an independent development. But they realized, and it was a spiritual exercise. They
Mm-hmm.
would learn how to do it, and so from their point of view, see, they were going to a higher level, into some other higher level of
Mm-hmm.
existence. And
Mm-hmm.
I know it does. It sounds not to us. It sounds like that because you learned it in the 11th grade. But I'm saying to them.
Mm-hmm.
Now the next step, and partly
Sorry, but
because of,
you're defining knowledge as spiritual too, right?
well, yes, I
Yeah.
mean, in the sense that they didn't distinguish it, but but then the next step was, see, in this context, strange as it seems to you and me, Kelly, that there was no such thing as a notion of truth as you and I appreciate it, because as I learned from my watching my own kids, especially my daughter, and who was just always a thinking person, and she, when she was 3 years old, she I knew from her discourse that she understood the concept of truth.
Mm-hmm.
And because what what
Ray, I'm
truth
sorry.
is.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
Truth is. Go ahead.
Truth is that which is the case independently of what anybody thinks, believes, or
Mm-hmm.
perceives.
Mm-hmm.
And that to us is learned at 3-year-old knowledge. But go back. Before there was writing, that was an impossible insight for anybody to achieve because it's the first inkling, the very first thing that people would come to realize that where that would be a factor is what you and I call deduction. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a fancy word for something you do every day automatically. If somebody tells you, if you hear one person, Andy is taller than Bill, and then you hear from another person, Bill is taller than Charlie. Well, you know for sure that Andy is taller than Charlie, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And but and you have to explain that. You have to invoke the notion of truth, because if the first premises are both true, then the conclusion must also be true. But when people
Mm-hmm.
couldn't hold the premises in their head long enough to see the necessary connection, there was no notion of truth. But once people could write things down, they could look at just a minute here. Just a minute. If this here is on, this here is on, this here's got to be on too. See the relationships, but there was no word for it. Well, how did they solve it? A guy who apparently worked at an oracle of the dead, where his day job was to go over to the other side. His name was Parmenides, and he lived in a city of Alea. And they found a statue of him where what they called him was an iatromantus, a seer physician. But he for whatever reason he said, and I was on the road. I had been many times before, which was, is talking about he had been to what they call the other world, the underworld, right? The other side. And I'd been there before, but he said, this time he's only like this goddess abducted me in this magical vehicle and brought me into this place. And she agreed me and she said, oh, you're not dead. She said, that's not why you're here. It's like I got a song I want to sing you. And she sang him this song, and it is the very first written out logical deduction. And so she said, when you go back to Earth, Parmenides, don't tell people to say this, believe this because the goddess says so. Tell them to work it out in their own minds and see it for themselves. So he went back to Earth and he would teach, this was a song, he would teach the students to sing it and sing it and sing it. This was, most people didn't read, right? You had to oral. But they would sing the song over and over and over and over until they had that aware, like a vision to them of that the premises are connected by this thing called truth, that there's something out there that's independent of us. And to them, that was a God. See, that was the only thing that they knew at that context that had that quality would be the divine.
So they would sing this song.
Yeah, until you saw the connection. It's just like but you've seen that connection, from childhood because you taught about it. But that was.
Do you know what the song was?
Yeah, I mean, it's written down. He tells the whole story, and it's the argument is still valid. But see, the point was that the point of
I want to
this.
know the song exactly.
This is like a logical deduction that. You see, it has that magical quality that you can go from one thing to another by this, what seems to be magic until you realize the rules, right? And so it was now that same pattern, and I call them logico-philosophical exercises. Another one was done by Ludwig Wittgenstein. It's just this really extraordinary piece of work called Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, where there's the there was a philosophical view at that time called logical atomism, which had to do with, it's a complex topic in logic, really, about how symbols or words refer to things. Okay, but anyway, in this context, he starts, proposition number one is that the world is everything that is, right? And that's, that's obvious, right? That, that you could say the universe is all that exists. Yeah. And so that seems obvious. And then he goes in, the second proposition is plainly a logical, just an incorrigible logical inference from the first, see? So then you got, but then that you go from the two, then you go to
Wait, what was
third
the second one? What was the second one?
I don't remember, but it's like,
okay.
Yeah, but it'd take me an hour to reconstruct it, but then then you go from the second one to the third one, and that's equally obvious logic. And then from there, from the third to the fourth, and it's like, and from the fourth to the fifth, and every step makes sense. And then the what you see in proposition 5 is that if you have carefully followed the logic that you've gone through, you see that this is all unintelligible nonsense. And you really do. You realize that makes no sense. And then the proposition number 7 is über wovon man nicht reden kann, darüber muss man schweigen, which means that about which we cannot speak, we must remain silent.
Thank you so much for this incredible. I feel literally this is Christmas, my birthday. I've died and gone to heaven. I literally am so deeply grateful for you both and for this. I'm beyond words and beyond words. Hello, Beyond Words. One more plug for them. Thank you. I'm giving you cyber hugs, and I hope I get to do that in person one of these days.
Thank you for listening to the Kelly Sullivan Walden Show. If you enjoyed this episode, take a moment to like, subscribe, comment, and share it with your friends. My show can be found on Apple iTunes, YouTube, Google Play, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to order my new book, A Crisis is a Terrible Thing to Waste, go to your favorite online or brick and mortar retailer, then head on over to kellysullivanwalden.com, tragic to magic. Input your order number and redeem your bonus gifts. I'm also excited to be offering a DreamWork practitioner training. So if that calls to you, go to kellysullivanwalden.com/DreamWork. If you'd like to join me for the live recording of these shows, most Wednesdays at noon Pacific, you can find me on Facebook at Kelly Sullivan Walden Dreams. If you have a question about your dreams or about how to transform your tragic into magic, email me at kelly@kellysullivanwalden.com. Until next time, remember, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And as you awaken to the power of your dreams, you make the world a lighter, brighter, more beautiful place, one dream at a time. Sweet dreams.